The battlefield was covered in smoke and fire. Explosions shook the ground as human soldiers took cover behind broken walls and shattered buildings. The sky was dark, filled with the shadows of massive Jorvath warships hovering like hungry beasts. The planet, once a thriving colony, was now reduced to ruins. Commander Ethan Cross wiped the dirt from his face, his sharp blue eyes scanning the battlefield. His soldiers were exhausted, their ammunition running low, and their hope fading. They had fought for days, but the Jorvath forces were too strong. Now, only a handful of his men remained, trapped in the ruins of an old command center. "Sir, we can't hold them back much longer," said Sergeant Lewis, breathing heavily. Ethan gritted his teeth. "We hold the line. No matter what happens, we don't surrender." Lewis nodded, but doubt flickered in his eyes. Everyone knew what surrender meant. Humans captured by the Jorvath never returned. A deep, rumbling sound echoed across the battlefield. The Jorvath war machine was moving forward, their armored walkers crushing debris beneath their massive feet. Their reptilian soldiers marched in perfect formation, weapons glowing with deadly energy. And at the center of it all, a towering Jorvath battleship descended from the sky, its engines humming like the breath of a giant. Ethan clenched his fists. He had fought the Jorvath for years, seen their power, their cruelty. But he had never seen them bring a ship like this before. Something was different. The enemy forces stopped advancing. A group of Jorvath warriors stepped aside, forming a path. From the massive battleship, a tall figure emerged, walking with grace and authority. Her golden eyes gleamed like fire, her violet skin untouched by the dust of battle. She wore dark silver armor, decorated with symbols of Jorvath royalty. Ethan's heart stopped. He knew her. Princess Soraya Tiveth. Years ago, before the war, he had met her on the Jorvath homeworld. She had been younger then, curious, rebellious, eager to learn about humans. They had fought side by side once, in a different battle, against a different enemy. And for a brief time, they had been friends. Now she was his enemy. She walked forward, stopping a few steps away from Ethan. The Jorvath soldiers raised their weapons, ready to strike if the humans resisted. Ethan's soldiers gripped their guns, but they all knew the truth. This battle was already lost. Soraya studied Ethan, her expression unreadable. Then, in a calm, steady voice, she spoke. "Commander Ethan Cross, you fought well, but this war is over for you." Ethan straightened his back, refusing to show weakness. "You're here to watch me die, Princess." Soraya's golden eyes flickered with something, an emotion she quickly hid. "Surrender. Your men will be spared." Ethan let out a dry laugh. "We both know that's not true." A long silence stretched between them. Around them, the battlefield still burned, but in that moment, it felt like only the two of them existed. The past hummed between them like a ghost. "You don't have to die today, Ethan," Soraya said, softer this time. But Ethan didn't move. He would never kneel. Soraya exhaled, then turned to the Jorvath warriors. "Take them." The soldiers surged forward. Ethan fought. His men fought. But they were outnumbered. Within minutes, it was over. Chains were placed around his wrists, and his soldiers were dragged away. As Ethan was led toward the Jorvath battleship, he stole one last glance at Soraya. She was watching him, and in her eyes, for just a second, he saw something that didn't belong on a Jorvath warrior's face. Regret. Years before the war, before the battles and betrayals, Ethan Cross had walked through the grand halls of the Jorvath capital as a guest, not a prisoner. The Jorvath homeworld, Verin, was a place of towering crystal cities, glowing rivers, and skies filled with three suns. It was a world unlike anything Ethan had seen before. He was part of a diplomatic mission, one of the few humans allowed to step into the heart of the Jorvath Empire. Humanity and the Jorvath were not enemies then. Not yet. Ethan had been young, a soldier chosen as a personal bodyguard for the human ambassador. It was supposed to be a peaceful mission. Learn about the Jorvath, build trust, and maybe, just maybe, prevent war. That was when he met Soraya Tveth. She had not been a war princess then, not yet hardened by battle. She was still young, still questioning the rules of her empire. Soraya had been curious about humans, something most of her kind did not understand. Why do humans fight so much? She had asked him once, her golden eyes filled with honest curiosity. Ethan had smirked. Why do Jorvath conquer so much? She had laughed at that. It had been the start of something neither of them expected, a strange friendship between a human soldier and a Jorvath princess. They had spent hours talking, arguing, learning about each other's people. Soraya had been fascinated by humanity's passion, creativity, and stubbornness. Ethan had been surprised by her willingness to listen, her desire to understand. But not everyone approved of their friendship. The Jorvath High Council saw humans as weak, unworthy of standing beside their empire. The idea of a Jorvath princess befriending a human was not just unusual, it was dangerous. And then, everything changed. The night of the assassins. Ethan had been standing outside the royal chambers when he heard the first scream. Without thinking, he rushed inside, his instincts as a soldier taking over. What he saw froze him in place. Soraya stood in the center of the room, her silver robe torn, her eyes wide with shock. Around her, 3 shadowy figures moved, their blades glowing with poisoned energy. Assassins. Before Ethan could react, the first attacker lunged at Soraya. She dodged, barely, but the second came from behind. Ethan charged forward, his weapon already raised. A single shot rang out, striking one of the assassins in the chest. The other 2 spun to face him. "Get behind me," he shouted. Soraya, despite her fear, stood her ground. She was a Jorvath, proud, strong. But in that moment, Ethan didn't care about her pride. He only cared about keeping her alive. The assassins were fast. Ethan was faster. Years of battlefield training took over, and he fought like a man possessed. A knife slashed across his arm, but he ignored the pain. He took down the second assassin with a brutal punch to the throat. The last one tried to escape, but Soraya moved swiftly, grabbing a fallen dagger and striking with precision. It was over in seconds. Ethan was bleeding, breathing hard, but he turned to Soraya. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, staring at him with something new in her eyes. "You saved my life." He shrugged. "That's what friends do." But the attack was only the beginning. The next morning, whispers filled the palace. The assassins had not been common criminals. They had been sent by someone in the royal court. Someone who believed that Soraya had grown too close to the humans. The peace talks fell apart. The Jorvath High Council blamed humanity for the attack, twisting the truth for their own gain. Trust shattered. The alliance crumbled. Ethan was sent back to Earth. And within months, war had begun. Present day, the Jorvath warship. Ethan sat in the cold metal cell, his hands still bound in chains. His mind drifted back to that night, to the choices that had led him here. Outside, the Jorvath ship hummed as it moved through space. He knew where they were going, the Jorvath capital, where he would likely face trial, or worse. The door to his cell slid open. Soraya stepped inside. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she sighed. "You haven't changed." Ethan smirked. "You have." She frowned. "You should have surrendered. I could have protected you. You know I don't kneel." Soraya's expression hardened. "That stubbornness will get you killed." Ethan leaned forward. "Then tell me, princess, why did you hesitate back there? Why didn't you give the kill order?" Soraya didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked away. When she spoke, her voice was quiet. "Because I owe you my life." For the first time since his capture, Ethan felt a flicker of hope. The princess he had once called a friend was still in there, buried beneath years of war and duty. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance to change things. The cold metal walls of the Jorvath battleship surrounded Ethan like a prison. His hands were still bound, his body aching from the battle on Jorvath Prime. He had lost. His men were either dead or captured, and now he was at the mercy of the enemy. But the enemy standing before him was not just any Jorvath. It was Princess Soraya Tuveth, the woman he had once called a friend. She stood tall, her violet skin glowing under the dim light, her golden eyes locked onto his. There was no visible emotion on her face, but Ethan had known her long enough to see the hesitation in her posture. "You're taking me to the Jorvath capital," Ethan said. His voice was steady, but his mind was racing. "What happens when we get there?" Soraya didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned away, looking out through the narrow window of the cell. Outside, the darkness of space stretched endlessly, broken only by the distant light of stars. "The High Council will decide your fate," she finally said. "You're a high-ranking officer. They will interrogate you." And then, her voice trailed off. Ethan smirked. "And then they'll execute me." Soraya's jaw tightened, but she didn't deny it. He leaned back against the wall. "I always knew the Jorvath weren't the forgiving type." Soraya turned sharply, her golden eyes flashing. "This isn't my choice, Ethan. The war has taken too much. You think I don't hate it. You think I don't question everything." Ethan tilted his head. "Then make a different choice." A silence fell between them. It was a dangerous thing to say, and they both knew it. Soraya was a princess, bound by duty, expected to be loyal to her people. But Ethan could see the conflict in her eyes. He decided to push further. "You hesitated back on Jorvath Prime," he said. "When I stood before you in chains, you could have given the order right then and there. But you didn't." Soraya crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. "You think too highly of yourself, Commander." Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "No, I think you're not as cold as you pretend to be." Her eyes narrowed. "You don't understand what's at stake." "Then explain it to me," Ethan said. "Because from where I'm standing, you have two choices. You can let them kill me and continue this war, or—" He leaned forward, his voice lowering. "You can do something different." Soraya let out a slow breath. For a moment, she looked tired. Tired of war, tired of duty, tired of pretending. "Do you know what they call me now?" she said suddenly. "They call me the Blade of the Empire. They say I am the hand of the Council, the warrior who never questions orders." Ethan studied her carefully. "But you do question them, don't you?" She looked away. "It doesn't matter." "It does," Ethan pressed. "Because you and I both know how this ends if we keep following orders. More war, more death, until nothing is left." Soraya's hands clenched at her sides. She had spent years trying to bury the part of her that questioned, that doubted. But now, facing Ethan, those doubts came rushing back. She had fought for the Jorvath Empire because it was expected of her. She had killed because it was her duty. But now, for the first time in years, she wondered if she had been fighting on the wrong side. Could she betray everything she had known? Could she save Ethan? Soraya turned back to him, her golden eyes searching his face. "If I help you, what happens next?" Ethan gave her a small, knowing smile. "We end this war. Together." Soraya took a slow breath, then turned and walked toward the door. She paused before stepping out. "You're asking me to betray my people," she said quietly. Ethan's voice was calm but firm. "I'm asking you to choose." The door slid shut behind her, leaving Ethan alone in the cold, empty cell. But this time, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The hum of the Jorvath battleship was a constant presence, vibrating through the metal floors and walls. Ethan sat in his cold cell, his mind sharp despite the exhaustion settling in his bones. He knew he was running out of time. The ship was heading straight for the Jorvath capital, where the High Council would interrogate him, torture him for information, and then execute him. But there was still one unpredictable factor. Princess Soraya Tuveth. She hadn't made a decision yet, but Ethan knew she was close. He had seen the conflict in her eyes, the hesitation in her voice. She wasn't just a warrior. She was still the same person who had once questioned the path of her empire, the same person who had once called him a friend. The door to his cell slid open. Soraya stepped inside, her silver armor gleaming under the dim light. Her face was calm, unreadable, but her eyes flickered with something unspoken. "Get up," she ordered. Ethan raised an eyebrow, but obeyed. "Are you here to take me to my execution early, or is this something else?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped forward and, in one swift motion, unlocked his restraints. Ethan froze. His wrists tingled as the heavy metal cuffs fell to the floor. He stared at her, trying to read her expression. "You're helping me escape," he said, more a statement than a question. Soraya exhaled slowly. "I must be out of my mind." A grin spread across Ethan's face. "I won't argue with that." She shot him a sharp look. "Don't make me regret this." Ethan's instincts kicked in. He had spent years fighting, escaping impossible situations. But this was different. He wasn't alone this time. "How do we get out of here?" he asked. Soraya turned and motioned for him to follow. "There's a supply hangar near the lower decks. There's a small stealth transport there. If we can reach it before the alarms go off, we might have a chance." "Might." Ethan smirked. Soraya sighed. "It's not a perfect plan, Cross." He chuckled. "It's better than no plan at all." The race against time. Moving through the massive battleship unnoticed was nearly impossible. The corridors were lined with Jorvath soldiers, their reptilian forms standing in rigid formation, their energy weapons ready. Soraya led the way, her movements precise and controlled. She walked with the authority of a princess, and the soldiers didn't question her presence. Ethan, however, was a different story. They rounded a corner, heading toward a secured elevator when a guard blocked their path. "Commander, where are you taking the prisoner?" the soldier asked, his voice low and suspicious. Soraya didn't hesitate. "High Command has ordered his transfer to a secured chamber for additional interrogation." "Stand aside." The guard hesitated, his reptilian eyes narrowing. "We received no such orders." Ethan tensed. If the guard raised an alarm, they were dead. Soraya took a step forward, her golden eyes hard as steel. "Are you questioning my authority?" The soldier hesitated just a moment too long. In a blur of motion, Soraya struck, a swift, controlled attack that sent the guard collapsing to the floor, unconscious before he could react. Ethan whistled. "Remind me not to get on your bad side." "Shut up and move," Soraya muttered, dragging the unconscious guard out of sight. They reached the lower decks, where the supply hangar was located. The massive bay doors loomed ahead, leading to a row of parked ships. But before they could step forward, alarms blared through the ship. Soraya cursed under her breath. "They know." Ethan didn't waste time. "Which ship?" She pointed to a sleek, black vessel at the far end of the hangar. "That one. It's small, fast, and has cloaking capabilities. If we can get it off the ground, we can escape before they close the blast doors." "Then let's go." The two of them sprinted toward the transport, but the doors behind them burst open, and Jorvath soldiers flooded in. "Go!" Soraya shouted, drawing her blade. Ethan ran ahead, jumping into the pilot's seat. He didn't have time to think. His hands flew over the controls, activating the engines. Soraya fought like a storm, her blade slicing through enemies with ruthless precision. The Jorvath warriors hesitated. None of them wanted to strike their princess, but they couldn't let her escape with an enemy. Ethan's voice crackled through the ship's speakers. "Soraya, get in, now." She parried one last attack before leaping into the transport. The hatch slammed shut behind her as Ethan throttled the engines to full power. The ship lurched forward, speeding toward the hangar doors just as they started to close. Lasers fired, streaky, in past them as Jorvath fighters scrambled to intercept. "Hold on," Ethan shouted. Soraya braced herself as the transport shot through the closing doors, skimming through just seconds before impact. The ship trembled as it broke free into open space. Behind them, the Jorveth battleship loomed, its weapons charging. Ethan flipped a switch, activating stealth mode. The ship faded from view, vanishing into the darkness of space. A tense silence followed. Then, after a few moments, Soraya let out a slow breath. "We did it," she said, almost in disbelief. Ethan smirked. "Yeah. Now comes the hard part." She turned to him. "Which is?" He leaned back in the pilot's chair, eyes locked on the vast unknown ahead of them. "Figuring out how to end this war." The stolen Jorvath stealth transport drifted through the dark void of space, its cloaking system engaged, making it invisible to pursuing enemy ships. Inside, the hum of the ship's engines was the only sound breaking the heavy silence between Ethan Cross and Princess Soraya Tuveth. Ethan sat at the pilot's seat, his hands gripping the controls as he studied the ship's navigation system. They had escaped, but they weren't safe yet. The Jorveth Empire would not let them go so easily. Soraya stood behind him, arms crossed, her golden eyes scanning the control panels. Despite the calm on her face, Ethan could tell her mind was racing. She had just betrayed her people. For him. "Where do we go now?" she finally asked. Ethan sighed. "Somewhere the Jorvath won't find us. Somewhere we can plan." He glanced at her. "Unless you changed your mind and want to turn me in after all." Soraya's expression hardened. "Don't test me, Cross." He smirked but said nothing. He knew this wasn't easy for her. She had spent her life serving the Empire, believing in its power, in its right to rule. And now, in one reckless moment, she had chosen a different path. But was it the right choice? Soraya turned away, staring out the window at the endless stars. Her thoughts were a storm of doubt. Had she just thrown everything away for nothing? "You said we need to end this war," she said after a long pause. "How?" Ethan leaned back in his chair. "We find proof that the war was built on lies." Soraya frowned. "Lies? You know as well as I do that this war wasn't started by humanity," Ethan said. "Your High Council wanted it. They used the assassination attempt on you years ago as an excuse. But what if we could prove that someone inside the Jorveth government planned that attack?" Soraya stiffened. She had spent years trying to forget that night, the night Ethan had saved her life. She had never questioned the Council's version of the story. But now, as she thought back, something felt wrong. "If you're right," she said slowly, "then the war was never about justice. It was about control." Ethan nodded. "Exactly. And if we can prove it, maybe, just maybe, we can force a peace." Soraya exhaled. "That's a dangerous theory, Cross." "Good thing I like danger," Ethan said with a grin. She rolled her eyes. "We need a lead. Something solid." Ethan pulled up a map on the ship's holoscreen. "There's one place that might have what we need. Varin Prime, your homeworld." Soraya's eyes widened. "Are you insane? That's the heart of the Empire. It's the most heavily guarded planet in Jorveth space. Which means it also has the most secrets," Ethan said. "If anyone has records about what really happened the night of the assassination attempt, they'll be stored in the Royal Archives." Soraya's mind raced. The archives were the most secure database in the Empire, accessible only to high-ranking officials. But she was a princess. If they could get to Varin Prime, she might be able to get inside. But if they were caught, it would mean death. She turned back to Ethan, studying him carefully. "You really think this is worth it?" Ethan's expression grew serious. "How many more people need to die before someone tries to stop this war? If we do nothing, millions more will suffer. We have a chance to change that." Soraya closed her eyes for a moment. She had been raised to believe in the strength of the Jorveth Empire. But now, for the first time, she wondered if strength meant more than just war. When she opened her eyes, her decision was made. "Set a course for Varin Prime," she said. Ethan nodded. "Now that's the Princess Soraya I remember." She shot him a look. "If this plan fails, I'll kill you myself. Ethan chuckled. That's fair. As he set the coordinates, the ship adjusted its course, heading straight toward the heart of the enemy's empire. It was a reckless plan, a dangerous plan, but it was the only chance they had. The stealth transport glided silently through the darkness of space, approaching Varin Prime, the capital world of the Jorvath Empire. From a distance, the planet looked beautiful, a world of silver cities, glowing spires, and endless oceans. But beneath that beauty lay danger. Ethan Cross and Princess Soraya Tuveth sat in the cockpit, staring at the planet ahead. This is madness, Soraya muttered. Ethan smirked. You keep saying that, but here we are. Soraya exhaled sharply. I still don't understand how we're supposed to land without getting caught. The entire planet is a fortress. Ethan tapped on the ship's controls. Your clearance codes should still work, right? She hesitated. They should, but if the High Council has labeled me a traitor, they'll flag my ship the moment we enter the atmosphere. Ethan grinned. Then we'll have to be creative. Soraya narrowed her eyes. I don't like that smile, Cross. What are you planning? He pressed a few buttons on the console. We're going in as a diplomatic vessel from the outer colonies. The ship's transponder has been modified. It'll broadcast as a neutral envoy requesting clearance to land. Soraya's eyes widened. You hacked a Jorvath military transponder. Ethan shrugged. I had some time to kill. Soraya shook her head. If this fails, they'll shoot us out of the sky. Ethan's fingers hovered over the engage button. Only one way to find out. Soraya clenched her fists. I hate this plan. You hate all my plans, Ethan said, but they usually work. Before she could argue, he engaged the cloaking drive and steered the ship toward the planet's upper atmosphere. Landing under fire, the ship shook violently as it entered the atmosphere, the heat shields glowing bright orange. Warning alarms blared across the control panel. Ethan gripped the controls tightly. Here we go. A voice crackled over the comms. Unidentified vessel, state your purpose or be fired upon. Soraya took a deep breath and leaned forward. This is Envoy Vessel Thal 7 requesting permission to land. Diplomatic clearance code SEN 4382. There was a long silence. Then the voice returned. Clearance granted. Proceed to docking bay 42. Soraya let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. Ethan grinned. See, easy. Soraya glared at him. I still don't trust you. You trusted me enough to get on this ship, Ethan replied. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned her focus to what came next, the Royal Archives. The mission begins. Once they landed, Ethan and Soraya disguised themselves in formal Jorvath robes. Soraya's royal crest was hidden beneath her cloak, and Ethan had adjusted his appearance enough to pass as a diplomat from a far-off system. They walked calmly through the busy docking bay, blending in with the crowds. Guards patrolled the area, but none of them paid attention to the supposed envoys. We need to get to the Imperial Palace, Soraya whispered. That's where the archives are. Ethan asked. Soraya nodded. The information we need will be in the restricted data vaults, but only high-ranking officials can access them. Ethan smirked. Good thing you're a princess. Soraya rolled her eyes but kept walking. They made their way toward the transport hub, where hovercars and shuttles carried officials across the city. Soraya approached a security terminal and quickly typed in her old clearance code. A moment later, a sleek black transport shuttle opened its doors for them. You still have access? Ethan asked, impressed. Soraya stepped inside. I was second in line to the throne, Cross. They don't erase people like me so easily. Ethan followed her in, and the shuttle took off, soaring through the towering spires of Varin Prime's capital. As they neared the palace, Ethan's grip on his concealed weapon tightened. What are the chances we make it through this without getting shot at? Soraya sighed. Very low. Great, Ethan muttered. The Royal Archives. The Imperial Palace was a marvel of alien architecture. tall, curved structures of silver and obsidian, glowing with intricate energy patterns. At the center stood the royal archives, where the most classified information in the Jorvith Empire was stored. Soraya led Ethan through hidden corridors, avoiding the heavily guarded main halls. She still remembered the secret paths from her childhood, when she used to sneak around the palace. They reached the entrance to the restricted data vaults, a massive reinforced door guarded by 2 elite Jorvith warriors. Soraya took a deep breath. "Follow my lead." She stepped forward, her posture regal, her voice steady. "I am Princess Soraya Tiveth. I demand access to the restricted archives." Now, the guards hesitated, their eyes widening in shock. "Princess." "But the council said." "I don't care what the council said," Soraya interrupted. "I have urgent business. Are you questioning my authority?" The guards stiffened, exchanging uncertain glances. Then one of them slowly stepped aside and activated the security panel. The massive doors slid open. Ethan followed Soraya inside, whispering, "Remind me never to play poker with you." She smirked. "Shut up and keep moving." The truth hidden in shadows. Inside the vault, rows of glowing data tablets lined the walls. Soraya moved quickly, searching for records from the time of the assassination attempt. Ethan kept watch, his pulse quickening. They didn't have much time. Finally, Soraya pulled out a data slate and activated it. Her eyes scanned the text, and then she froze. Ethan noticed her expression. "What is it?" Soraya's hands trembled. The assassination attempt. Her voice was barely a whisper. It wasn't done by humans. It was ordered by the Jorvith High Council. Ethan's stomach tightened. "They tried to kill you." Soraya's breath was shaky. "They wanted war. They needed a reason to attack Earth. And I was just a tool." Ethan clenched his fists. "Then we finally have proof. We can expose them." But before they could say anything else, a cold mechanical voice echoed through the vault. "Integriders detted. Security radius VNSE activated." The doors slammed shut behind them. Soraya's eyes widened. "They know we're here." Ethan pulled out his weapon. "Then let's give them a fight." Alarms blared through the royal archives, red lights flashing across the vaulted chamber. The doors had sealed shut, trapping Ethan Cross and Princess Soraya Tiveth inside. Ethan raised his weapon, his muscles tensed. "Looks like they don't want us leaving." Soraya clutched the data slate in her hands. The truth was here, proof that the Jorvith High Council had staged her assassination to start the war, proof that everything she had been taught to believe was a lie. And now, they would do anything to stop her from escaping with it. A cold, robotic voice filled the room. "Integriders identified. Eliminate IMMEDATOI." The walls slid open, revealing combat drones, their sleek metallic bodies gleaming under the archive's dim lights. Their energy weapons hummed to life, targeting Ethan and Soraya. Ethan fired first, his plasma shots striking the nearest drone, sending sparks flying. "We need to move now." Soraya dodged behind a console as a bolt of energy blasted past her. She quickly activated her wrist device, tapping into the palace's security systems. "I can override the lockdown, but I need time." Ethan gritted his teeth. "I'll keep them busy." He rolled to cover, dodging another barrage of enemy fire. He took down another drone, but more kept coming, pouring into the room like an unstoppable tide. Soraya worked fast, her fingers dancing across the holographic display. The system was trying to lock her out, but she still had royal access codes for now. "Come on, just a few more seconds." Ethan ducked behind a pillar as a drone's energy blast melted part of the wall next to him. No pressure, but they're getting closer. Soraya's screen flashed, "Access granted." She slammed a final command. The vault doors hissed open. Ethan fired a final shot, taking down the last drone. Time to go. They rushed out, sprinting down the corridor as security reinforcements arrived behind them. "How do we get out of the palace?" Ethan asked, breathing hard. Soraya's mind raced. "There's a hidden passageway in the throne room. It leads to an underground escape tunnel." "Then let's hope it still works," Ethan muttered. The throne room confrontation. They burst into the grand throne room, its towering walls lined with golden banners and ancient artifacts. At the far end, the massive throne of the Jorvath Emperor stood in silence, bathed in the soft glow of energy crystals. Soraya ran to the wall behind the throne, searching for the hidden switch. Ethan turned to cover her, but then froze. A figure stood in the doorway. Draped in royal armor, his silver eyes cold and calculating, High Lord Varric Tiveth, Soraya's uncle, blocked their path. "Soraya," Varric said, his voice smooth yet deadly, "I had hoped you would return to your senses. Instead, you bring a human into our sacred halls." His gaze shifted to Ethan with pure disgust. Soraya lifted her chin. "The war was built on lies. The council tried to have me kill so they could justify attacking Earth." Varric smiled. "And what will you do with that knowledge?" She held up the data slate. "I'll expose the truth." Varric sighed, shaking his head. "You always were naive, my dear niece. The people do not want truth. They want order. They want power. And we will give it to them." Soraya clenched her fists. "I won't let you." Varric's expression hardened. "Then you leave me no choice." He drew his energy blade, the weapon humming with deadly power. Ethan stepped forward, his plasma pistol ready. "If you want her, you'll have to go through me." Varric smirked. "Gladly." He struck. Ethan barely dodged as the energy blade sliced through the air, cutting deep into the stone floor. He fired back, but Varric moved fast, his blade deflecting the shots with unnatural precision. Soraya, heart pounding, finally found the hidden switch. The wall slid open, revealing a dark passage. "Ethan," she shouted. Ethan dodged another swing and kicked Varric back, buying just enough time to leap toward the passageway. Soraya slammed the switch again, and the wall closed behind them, leaving Varric roaring in fury on the other side. They ran through the narrow tunnel, breathless. Ethan grinned. "Your uncle's not very friendly." Soraya glared at him. "This isn't funny, Cross." He chuckled. "A little funny." She rolled her eyes but kept running. The final escape. The tunnel led them to a hidden hangar, where an old Jorvath scout ship sat, covered in dust. "It still works?" Ethan asked, eyeing the rusted control panel. "It should," Soraya said, activating the ship's systems. The engines whirred to life. As they lifted off, the hangar doors slammed open, revealing Jorvath soldiers pouring in. "Hold on," Ethan shouted as Soraya punched the thrusters. The ship shot forward, blasting out into the night sky. Behind them, alarms blared across the city. Fighters scrambled to pursue, but Soraya twisted the controls, taking them into the chaotic traffic of the capital's sky lanes. Ethan took the weapons system, firing at their pursuers. Explosions lit up the night as enemy ships went down. Soraya angled the ship upward, breaking through the atmosphere. The darkness of space greeted them as they jumped into hyperspace, vanishing before the Jorvath fleet could stop them. A new future. In the quiet of deep space, Ethan and Soraya finally caught their breath. Soraya looked down at the data slate. In her hands was the key to ending the war. Ethan leaned back. "So, what now, Princess?" Soraya exhaled. "We take this to the people. We show them the truth." Ethan smiled. "Then let's change the galaxy." Soraya looked at him, her expression softening. "Thank you, Cross." He grinned. "For what?" "For always coming back," she said quietly. He chuckled. Some things never change. The stars stretched before them, a path leading toward a new future. And this time, they would fight for peace, not war.